Picture this, August 44. Deep inside a fortified bunker in East Prussia, Germany's top military minds are gathered around a map of France. They're looking at red pins marking American positions that have advanced over 400 miles in just 30 days. And these battle-hardened generals, they're actually laughing. General Alfred Jodl, one of Hitler's most trusted military advisors, slides his finger across the map and declares with absolute confidence, "The Americans have outrun their logistics. Patton will halt within days, perhaps hours. No army in history can sustain such speeds without fuel." Every officer in that room nodded in agreement. After all, these were the men who invented blitzkrieg. They understood mechanized warfare better than anyone alive. They'd watched their own armies grind to a halt in Russia when supply lines stretched too thin. They knew the iron law of military science. You can't move faster than your supplies. But what these German generals didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that 125 miles away, something unprecedented in military history was already rolling into action. 6,000 trucks, 23,000 drivers, an endless convoy stretching across the French countryside, with headlights blazing in the middle of the night, violating every rule of military caution they'd ever learned. This wasn't just a supply operation. This was the Red Ball Express, a logistics miracle so audacious, so impossibly effective that it would shatter German military confidence and prove that sometimes the real weapons of war aren't tanks or planes, they're trucks. Let's understand why the Germans were so confident American logistics would fail. This wasn't arrogance, this was experience speaking, hard-earned through years of brutal warfare. The German military had pioneered modern mechanized warfare. They'd shocked the world with their blitzkrieg tactics in Poland and France, moving armored divisions at speeds previous generations thought impossible. But they'd also learned the painful lesson every army eventually learns. Brilliant tactics mean nothing if your soldiers have no bullets and your tanks have no fuel. In Russia, the Germans experienced this nightmare firsthand. Their panzer divisions would race hundreds of miles into Soviet territory, achieving tactical victories that should have ended the war. Then they'd sit immobilized for weeks, waiting for supplies to catch up. German trucks broke down on primitive Russian roads. Their horse-drawn wagons, which still made up 80% of German transport, couldn't keep pace with mechanized spearheads. Railway lines had to be converted from Russian to German gauge, creating bottlenecks hundreds of miles from the front. General Heinrich von Ludwig, who would later command the 47th Panzer Corps, had written detailed analyses of this problem. He'd calculated that mechanical advantage actually became a disadvantage when supply lines stretched beyond 300 miles. Machines need fuel, ammunition, spare parts. The faster you advance, the faster you consume supplies, and the longer those supplies take to reach you. It's a mathematical trap that eventually catches every army. So when German intelligence reported in August 1944 that Patton's Third Army was now over 400 miles from the Normandy beaches, advancing on a 60-mile front with 12 divisions, the calculations seemed irrefutable. Each Sherman tank consumed fuel at half a mile per gallon. Each infantry division needed 700 tons of supplies daily. Each armored division required 1,000 tons. That meant Patton needed 12,000 tons of supplies every single day, transported 400 miles over roads the Germans had systematically destroyed during their retreat. General Major Siegfried Westphal, who would soon become Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, calculated on August 20th that even under ideal conditions, unlimited trucks, perfect roads, zero mechanical failures, the Americans couldn't physically sustain Patton's advance more than 48 hours. "Physical laws cannot be violated," he wrote, "not even by American industry." The Germans were about to learn that Americans don't violate physical laws, they just overwhelm them with volume. On August 25, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Eyre of the Motor Transport Service stood before a room full of deeply skeptical officers in a requisitioned French chateau. The situation was desperate. Patton's Third Army was making military history with the speed of its advance, but that speed was consuming supplies at rates no logistics system had ever handled. Traditional military supply methods had completely collapsed. Railways couldn't be repaired fast enough. Depot-to-depot distribution created bottlenecks that slowed everything to a crawl. Scheduled convoys arrived too late with too little. The entire carefully planned logistics structure of the European campaign was buckling under Patton's relentless momentum. Eyre's proposal was radical, some thought insane. "Gentlemen," he announced, "we're going to create a one-way highway from Cherbourg and the beaches directly to the front lines. Every vehicle will run 20 hours out of 24, no stopping except for gas and emergencies. We'll move 12,500 tons daily minimum." The officers stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Operating trucks 20 hours a day? Drivers would collapse. Running convoys with headlights at night? They'd be sitting ducks for German aircraft. Creating dedicated one-way highways? The traffic management alone would be impossible. But Eyre had thought it through. The name came from railway terminology. A red ball freight was an express shipment that took absolute priority over everything else. The Red Ball Express would operate on the same principle: absolute priority, no delays, no exceptions. The technical specifications defied every principle of German military doctrine. 2 parallel one-way highways, one for loaded trucks heading east, one for empties returning west. 24-hour operations with headlights blazing, abandoning all blackout discipline that armies had followed for centuries. A no-stop policy except for fuel and mechanical failures. Convoys spaced just 5 minutes apart, maintaining a 35-mile-per-hour average speed even on damaged roads. Mobile maintenance units positioned every 50 miles to handle breakdowns. Military police checkpoints authorized to remove any vehicle traveling below 25 miles per hour to keep the traffic flowing. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, commanding the logistics section, reviewed the numbers and shook his head. "We need 140 truck companies, nearly 6,000 vehicles operating at 90% availability. That's impossible by any logistics textbook ever written." Yet within 36 hours, the impossible was operational. On August 26, 1944, drivers from the 39 16th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their GMC CCKW 2.5-ton trucks nicknamed Deuce and a Half, loaded with 105mm artillery shells, and rolled out toward Patton's guns 300 miles east. The Red Ball Express was born. Here's something the history books often gloss over, but we need to talk about it. Of the 23,000 drivers who operated the Red Ball Express, approximately 75% were African American soldiers serving in a still segregated American military. Think about the profound irony of this moment. These men couldn't eat in white restaurants back home, couldn't use white facilities in much of America. They were denied equal rights in the country they were fighting for. Yet here they were, keeping the most celebrated white general's army in motion, proving Hitler's racial theories catastrophically wrong with every mile they drove. The drivers developed their own culture almost immediately. They painted slogans on their trucks that told their story. Patton's Blood Bank, Hitler Here We Come, Detroit to Berlin Express. These weren't just slogans, they were declarations. These soldiers understood they were making history, proving something the world needed to see. They created their own traffic rules that prioritized mission over safety. Slower vehicles pulled off immediately, no questions asked. Mechanical failures were pushed into ditches to keep traffic moving. Any truck traveling below 20 miles per hour was considered a roadblock and had to get out of the way. This wasn't recklessness. This was a group of men who understood that Patton's tanks would stop rolling if they didn't keep moving. By August 28th, just 2 days into operations, German reconnaissance units began reporting something that made no sense to their commanders. Units from Aufklärung 116 radioed from positions overlooking the main Red Ball route. Continuous vehicle column, headlights visible for 20 kilometers, no spacing, no blackout discipline. Estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour. Americans have abandoned all military precaution. This violated everything German military doctrine taught. Headlights at night invited an air attack. Continuous columns presented perfect artillery targets. No spacing between vehicles meant a single disabled truck could halt an entire convoy. Yet the Americans didn't seem to care. They just kept rolling. General Lieutenant Edgar Feuchinger, commanding the 21st Panzer Division, personally observed the Red Ball Express from concealed positions on August 30th. His report to Army Group B headquarters reflected growing alarm. The enemy operates a supply system beyond our comprehension. Vehicles pass at 30-second intervals, day and night, without pause. They don't hide, don't disperse, don't follow any rules we understand. It's not military science, it's mass production applied to warfare. He was absolutely right. What the Germans couldn't grasp was that American logistics operated on fundamentally different principles. Where German doctrine emphasized concealment and conservation, Americans relied on volume and redundancy. Where Germans meticulously maintained every vehicle, Americans assumed 20% mechanical failure and simply built that into their planning. Where Germans followed strict military procedures developed over decades, Americans improvised solutions in real time and adjusted as they went. Let's talk about the actual numbers the Red Ball Express achieved because they're almost hard to believe. In the first week alone, August 25th to 31st, 1944, the Red Ball Express delivered 89,939 tons of supplies. That's a daily average of 12,848 tons. Each truck made the 686-mile round-trip journey approximately 1.5 times daily. The operation itself consumed 300,000 gallons of fuel just to run the trucks. That's more gasoline than many German armies received for all purposes combined. When German logistics specialists captured these numbers from American documents, they dismissed them as propaganda. No logistics operation could achieve those numbers. It was physically impossible. Except the numbers were real, and they were accelerating. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express had established a rhythm that seemed to mock every principle of logistics the Germans had developed over decades. Convoys departed every 5 minutes from the western terminus, every single 5 minutes, 24 hours a day. The average convoy size was 67 vehicles. The load per vehicle was officially 5 tons, but drivers routinely overloaded to 7 tons without anyone stopping them. The time to cover 350 miles one way averaged 14 hours. Turnaround time at each end was just 2 hours. At any given moment, 5,000 vehicles were in constant motion across France. The Red Ball Express generated innovations hourly as drivers and mechanics solved problems that German military science considered insurmountable. When trucks broke down, approximately 1,800 daily, which would have paralyzed any European army, mobile maintenance units performed repairs right on the roadside. Mechanics developed a brutal but effective triage system. You got 15 minutes to fix it, or it got pushed off the road. Parts were cannibalized from vehicles deemed unrepairable. Engines were swapped in 45 minutes using mogul cranes that traveled with the convoys. When the designated Red Ball routes became congested, drivers didn't wait for orders. They created alternate paths. They commandeered French buses to move personnel, freeing up more trucks for cargo. They captured German vehicles, painted them olive drab, and pressed them into service. They built bypasses around destroyed bridges using rubble from bombed buildings as roadbed. When night fog made driving dangerous, they drove anyway, following the taillights of the truck ahead. The Germans, observing this organized chaos from their positions, couldn't comprehend it. Their military doctrine emphasized careful planning, maintenance schedules, and proper procedures. The Americans violated every principle, yet their system somehow accelerated rather than collapse. It was maddening to watch. The most stunning revelation for German observers was American fuel management. The Red Ball Express consumed 300,000 gallons of gasoline daily just for its own operations, more than the entire German army groups received for all purposes, yet American fuel never ran short. The reason? The Americans had created a parallel marvel called Operation Pluto, pipelines under the ocean.
By September 1944, fuel was flowing through underwater pipelines laid across the English Channel that German intelligence hadn't even detected existed. Forward fuel dumps were established every 25 miles along the Red Ball route. Tanker trucks ran their own parallel convoy system, ensuring no vehicle waited more than 10 minutes for refueling. General Major Walter Warmeland observed from aerial reconnaissance photographs, "The Americans have fuel dumps larger than our entire strategic reserves. They burn more moving gasoline than we allocate to entire panzer divisions. This isn't war as we understand it. It's mass production applied to warfare." He'd identified the fundamental difference. Germany was fighting a war with finite resources, carefully husbanding every gallon and every bullet. America was fighting a war with effectively infinite resources, where the only question was how fast you could move supplies from the factories to the front. The impact. Patton's impossible advance. The Red Ball Express didn't just supply Patton's advance, it multiplied its speed exponentially. German military doctrine calculated that an armored division could sustain 20 to 30 miles of advance daily under optimal conditions. Patton's divisions, supplied by the Red Ball Express, averaged 40 to 60 miles daily for weeks. On September 1, 1944, the 4th Armored Division advanced 35 miles in morning operations, halted for resupply at noon, and Red Ball trucks were already waiting with fuel and ammunition. They advanced another 32 miles that afternoon. This 67-mile single-day advance shattered every assumption of German defensive planning, which had calculated a maximum of 30 miles daily advances. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, reviewing these reports in East Prussia, initially refused to believe them. No armored force can advance 60 miles daily for a week. Mechanical failures alone prevent it. This is propaganda or misidentification. But intercepted American radio traffic confirmed it. Even more disturbing for German commanders, the Americans were broadcasting their positions openly, without code, supremely confident in their ability to move faster than the Germans could react. They weren't hiding because they didn't need to hide. Speed was their protection.
By September 1944, German intelligence had compiled comprehensive reports on the Red Ball Express. The implications were catastrophic for Wehrmacht planning. Every assumption about American military capability required revision. Field Marshal Walter Model's response revealed growing desperation. If these reports are accurate, we face not a superior army, but a superior civilization. They make no effort to hide because they don't fear us. They waste resources because they have infinite resources. We cannot defeat this with military tactics. The Red Ball Express became an unintentional psychological weapon. German soldiers could hear American trucks all night, every night. Endless motors carrying endless supplies. They were down to 3 rounds per rifle, while Americans were bringing millions of rounds. The sound itself became psychological warfare, a constant reminder that defeat was inevitable, that they were fighting an enemy who could never be exhausted. German units reported that the sound of Red Ball convoys demoralized troops as effectively as actual combat. American psychological warfare units recognized this impact and began broadcasting truck engine sounds toward German lines even when actual convoys weren't present. German units reported these phantom convoys as real, demonstrating the psychological damage the operation had inflicted. The Red Ball Express drivers paid a physical price that German observers couldn't see from their positions. Drivers operated for 72 straight hours, hallucinating from exhaustion and Benzedrine tablets issued to keep them awake. Accidents killed approximately 300 drivers during the Red Ball's operational period. Trucks collided in fog, overturned on damaged roads, and burned when overheated engines ignited fuel lines. Yet morale remained extraordinarily high. These men, mostly African Americans denied equal rights at home, understood they were making history. They were proving Hitler's racial theories wrong with every mile driven, every ton delivered, every German defensive line that collapsed because Patton's tanks never ran out of gas. Captured German officers provided eloquent testimony to the Red Ball Express's impact. Oberst Arns von Luke, taken prisoner in September 1944, told his interrogators, "We knew we'd lost when we understood your supply system. You violate every rule, waste fuel, abandon vehicles, exhaust drivers, yet succeed through sheer volume. You've industrialized warfare beyond our comprehension."
The vehicles themselves amazed German engineers who examined captured or abandoned trucks. The GMC CCKW 2.5-ton truck, the backbone of the Red Ball Express, represented mass production perfection. General Motors had produced over 500,000 of these vehicles by war's end, more trucks than the entire German military possessed of all types combined. The trucks featured innovations Germans hadn't implemented. All-wheel drive as standard, not an exception for special vehicles. Automatic tire inflation systems. Waterproofing that allowed a 30-inch fording depth. Engines that ran reliably on low-quality fuel without modification. Haters that actually worked in winter conditions. More stunning was the American maintenance philosophy. Where Germans meticulously rebuilt engines, Americans simply replaced them with new ones and scrapped the old ones. Where Germans rationed parts and made do, Americans discarded entire vehicles for relatively minor problems because new trucks arrived faster than old ones could be repaired. Where Germans had a few master mechanics who could fix anything, Americans had thousands of competent mechanics who could perform 80% of repairs quickly. As the front moved east, the Red Ball Express adapted with speed that stunned German planning officers accustomed to weeks of preparation for major logistics changes. When the original route became insufficient, Americans created new routes overnight. The White Ball Express from Rouen to Paris, the Green Diamond from Cherbourg to railroad transfer points, the Red Lion from Bayeux to Brussels, and the ABC, Antwerp-Brussels-Charleroi. Each new route was operational within 48 hours of conception. German staff officers required weeks to plan similar operations. The Americans simply painted new markers, assigned trucks, and started rolling. Planning happened while driving, not before it.
The predominance of African American drivers in the Red Ball Express created profound cognitive dissonance for German racial theorists. Nazi ideology declared black people inferior, incapable of technical tasks, and lacking initiative. Yet these drivers were performing logistics miracles that German forces couldn't match. The African American soldiers understood the irony perfectly. They knew what the Nazis thought of them, which made them drive even harder. Every mile they drove proved Hitler wrong. They were fighting racism with truck keys, defeating Nazi ideology through superior performance. Some German prisoners forced to load Red Ball trucks as laborers found their worldview shattered by working alongside African American sergeants who calculated weight distributions faster than German engineers, who spoke better English than their German English instructors, who treated prisoners fairly despite everything Nazi propaganda had told them about racial behavior. The Red Ball Express required infrastructure Germans deemed impossible to create under combat conditions. American engineers built or reinforced 40 bridges, created 15 major fuel depots, established 26 maintenance stations, and constructed 8 temporary cities for drivers, all while the operation was running at full capacity. The bridge at Montereau had been destroyed by German engineers specifically to halt American logistics. The Wehrmacht calculated that replacement would require 6 weeks minimum. American engineers built a temporary bridge in 14 hours, while Red Ball convoys detoured only 8 miles on hastily bulldozed bypass roads. German engineers observed this and couldn't process what they were seeing. No planning meetings, no detailed blueprints, just immediate action. Americans built faster than the Germans could destroy. One Red Ball Express achievement particularly stunned German artillery officers: ammunition supply rates that exceeded their highest theoretical calculations. American artillery units fired without restriction, a luxury no German unit had enjoyed since 1942. During the reduction of Metz fortifications in September 1944, 19th Corps artillery fired 100,000 rounds in 24 hours. The Red Ball Express delivered every round plus 20% surplus for the next day. German artillery defending Metz was rationed to 50 rounds per gun per day. The disparity was overwhelming. American guns fired continuously for hours, while German artillery officers could only calculate that such bombardments required 50 truckloads of ammunition per hour. The Red Ball provided it without pause. In early September 1944, the Red Ball Express faced its greatest challenge. Patton's Third Army had advanced so far that even the Red Ball struggled to maintain supply rates.
The round trip now exceeded 700 miles. Drivers were collapsing from exhaustion. Vehicles were disintegrating. German intelligence detected the strain and believed their moment had come. General der Panzertruppen Hasso von Manteuffel reported September 8th, American supply lines show signs of collapse. Convoy intervals have increased from 5 to 15 minutes. Vehicle speed has decreased. This is our opportunity. But American adaptability again surprised the Germans. Within 72 hours, the Red Ball Express had reorganized, created intermediate transfer points cutting individual driver runs to 350 miles, implemented driver rotation systems so no one drove more than 20 hours at a stretch, established forward main maintenance bases, and doubled the number of assigned vehicles. By September 12th, tonnage delivery had actually increased. The crisis that should have halted Patton only made the system stronger. Supplementing the Red Ball Express, Americans implemented another logistics solution Germans deemed impossible to create under combat conditions: large-scale aerial supply. C-47 transport aircraft began delivering critical supplies directly to forward units, each aircraft carrying 3 tons. On September 16, 1944, Wehrmacht observers counted 900 transport flights in a single day, delivering 2,700 tons by air. The Luftwaffe, at its peak, had managed 300 tons daily to Stalingrad and considered that a maximum effort that cost them hundreds of irreplaceable transport aircraft. The Americans used transport planes like trucks, no concerns about losses, no fuel limitations. They assumed losses and overwhelmed them with numbers. The Wehrmacht couldn't compete with this industrial arithmetic. The Red Ball Express operated under command principles that violated German military hierarchy. Junior officers made decisions reserved for generals in the Wehrmacht. Sergeants commanded operations larger than German colonels managed. This decentralization baffled German observers. American logistics operated without apparent central control. Every lieutenant acted like a general, every sergeant like a colonel. Chaos should have resulted. That's what German doctrine predicted. Instead, they achieved efficiency that the Wehrmacht couldn't match with their rigid hierarchy. Problems were solved at the level they occurred, not referred up the chain of command. Speed trumped protocol. By October 1944, advancing railheads began to reduce the Red Ball Express requirements. The operation that was supposed to last 10 days had continued for 82 days, achieving numbers that still seem impossible. Total cargo delivered 412,193 tons. Total ton miles 222 million. Vehicles employed 5,958 daily average, peak 7,000. Total drivers employed 23,000. Operating days 82. Fuel consumed daily 700,000 gallons just to run the operation. Tires worn out 180,000. Vehicles destroyed or abandoned over 5,000. Cost $100 million in 1944 dollars. German divisions defeated through supply advantage 47. Estimated days the war was shortened 180. Reviewing these figures in captivity, German officers admitted they had calculated American logistics based on European precedent. They'd multiplied their own best performance by 3 and assumed that was the American maximum. They were wrong by a factor of 10.
Field Marshal Walter Model wrote in his final report before his suicide, "We were not defeated by American tanks or planes primarily. We were defeated by American trucks." The Red Ball Express proved that in modern war, logistics is strategy, not just support for strategy. The transition to rail transport was itself a marvel. American railroad engineers had reconstructed 1,000 miles of destroyed French rail lines while the Red Ball was running. They laid new track faster than the Germans had destroyed it, often using captured German rail equipment that American mechanics got running better than it had performed for the Wehrmacht. On November 16, 1944, the Red Ball Express officially ended, but the stories of individual heroism lived on. Corporal John L. Houston drove continuously for 48 hours, delivering ammunition to the 2nd Armored Division, falling asleep at the wheel 3 times but continuing after other drivers revived him. Private Booker T. Washington's truck caught fire from overheated brakes while carrying medical supplies. Instead of abandoning it, as regulations required, he drove the burning vehicle 2 miles to a medical hospital,
jumping out as flames reached the cab. The supplies he delivered saved wounded soldiers from both armies. These stories, multiplied thousands of times, revealed American military culture to observing Germans: individual initiative over rigid protocol, calculated risk-taking over safety regulations, mission accomplishment over procedural compliance. Desperately, German forces attempted to create their own version of the Red Ball Express during the Battle of the Bulge. Operation Greif included plans to use captured American trucks to create German supply lines. The effort failed immediately. German drivers couldn't maintain American speeds. They'd been trained to conserve vehicles, not push them to destruction. German mechanics couldn't repair American equipment fast enough. They lacked the parts, the training, and the replacement vehicles. German fuel supplies couldn't sustain the consumption rates. Most fundamentally, Germans couldn't replicate the American attitude of unlimited resources. As Oberst Lieutenant Otto Skorzeny reported, commanding the operation, "We captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were deadlined. Americans would have replaced them. We tried to repair them. That difference explains our defeat." The winter of 1944-1945 provided the Red Ball Express's ultimate test before it ended. Freezing rain, snow, and ice should have stopped wheeled transport. German doctrine stated that wheeled logistics became impossible below -10 degrees Celsius. Yet Red Ball Express principles continued in successor operations. Drivers wrapped chains on tires, poured alcohol in radiators, and kept rolling. Speeds dropped from 35 miles per hour to 15 miles per hour, but tonnage delivery continued. German observers reported ice-covered convoys moving through blizzards that had stopped panzer divisions. The Americans had created a logistics system that functioned regardless of weather, terrain, or enemy action. It wasn't elegant or efficient by German standards, but it was unstoppable. In May 1945, captured German logistics officers were required to study Red Ball Express operations for Allied historical records. Their conclusions were unanimous and devastating to German military pride. General der Infanterie Friedrich Schultz summarized, "The Red Ball Express represents warfare we never imagined. Americans created a temporary civilization, thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, millions of tons of supplies that existed only to feed armies, then dissolved when no longer needed. We built permanent infrastructure over the years. They created superior temporary systems in days." The most insightful analysis came from General Heinz Guderian, father of German armored warfare. "We invented blitzkrieg but never solved its fundamental limitation, logistics. Americans solved it through industrial excess that we deemed impossible. The Red Ball Express was not a supply line, but a flowing river of material that drowned our forces." The Red Ball Express cost the United States approximately $100 million in 1944 dollars. German staff officers accustomed to managing scarcity found the figure incomprehensible. They would never waste resources at that scale. Yet Americans considered it cheap. The operation enabled the capture of 400,000 German soldiers, the liberation of France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and shortened the war by an estimated 6 months. Each day of war costs America $250 million. The Red Ball Express paid for itself in a single day of shortened conflict. An unexpected consequence was the revolutionary impact on post-war civilian logistics. Thousands of drivers returned to America with experience operating the world's largest transportation network. These veterans founded trucking companies, designed interstate highways, and created the modern American logistics industry. Companies like Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways were started by Red Ball veterans who applied military logistics to civilian commerce. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the United States Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp honoring the Red Ball Express. The ceremony at the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. recognized the operation that had been overshadowed by combat operations but proved equally decisive in Allied victory. Veterans who attended spoke of their pride in an operation that proved American industrial might and individual determination could overcome any obstacle. They had driven through exhaustion, through mechanical failure, through weather that stopped armor. They were black soldiers, mostly segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition during the war, but they had delivered victory at 35 miles per hour on a one-way road to Germany. On September 15, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, supreme German commander in the West, received comprehensive intelligence on the Red Ball Express. After studying the reports for hours, he summoned his staff with a devastating admission. Gentlemen, we face something beyond military solution. The Americans have created a supply system that makes distance irrelevant. Our strategy assumed a culminating point where advancing forces outrun supplies. That point doesn't exist. They have revolutionized warfare, and we are fighting the last war. The last word belongs to an unnamed German officer, quoted by a Red Ball driver at the 1994 commemoration. Standing beside a road in Belgium, watching the endless convoy of American trucks, the officer said in accented English to his captors, "We prepared for everything, your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks. How do you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers?" The answer rolled past him at 5-minute intervals, driven by exhausted Americans who were rewriting the rules of warfare one delivery at a time. The Red Ball Express had made logistics into strategy, supply into victory, and trucks into the most decisive weapon of the European war. The German generals stopped laughing when they understood this truth, but by then, Patton was already at their gates, supplied by 23,000 drivers, 75% of them African American, who had proven that in modern war, the convoy of trucks matters more than the column of tanks. They had revolutionized warfare forever at 35 miles per hour, headlights blazing, rolling through the night toward victory.